Okay, so let's pick up. We're on Daf Kafchet Amud Bet. We were discussing the machloket between Rabbi Yehuda and Chachamim regarding machshirei ochel nefesh. So we got to the source of the argument, about halfway down the Amud. Right, maybe, but before halfway it's here. So we said like this. Let's go back to this. אחד סכין שנפקמה ואחד שיפוט שנרצם ואחד גריפת ענוב כליים ביום טוב. These are three cases, three examples. Sorry, can everybody hear me okay? Okay, so these are three examples that the Gemara gave of actions which would be machshirei ochel nefesh, and it says in each of these cases we come to the machloket between Rabbi Yehuda and Chachamim. Rabban machloket Rabbi Yehuda v'Rabbanan. Tanya. Good morning, Jeffrey. We're about halfway down on Daf Kafchet Amud Bet. Tanya, ein ben Yom Tov l'Shabbat. I think it's Jeffrey. Ein ben Yom Tov l'Shabbat. Ela ochel nefesh bilvad. Rabbi Yehuda matir af machshirei ochel nefesh. Right? There is no difference in terms of the actions that are permitted or forbidden, in terms of the melachot that you are allowed to perform. Everything which is forbidden on Shabbat would be forbidden on Yom Tov likewise, with the exception of ochel nefesh. Says Rabbi Yehuda, there is a further exception of machshirei ochel nefesh. So what is the reason? What is the source of this? We'll see they all learn it from the same pasuk, but they learn it slightly differently. Right, this is the pasuk which teaches us about ochel nefesh, because it says that's the words before, which are not quoted here in the Gemara. The Gemara quotes a pasuk. We always have to know the full pasuk. Right? Once upon a time, people knew all of Tanakh of Bahar, so then they read through. There was no problem. Many times, sometimes it happens where the Gemara will actually quote part of a pasuk, but the limud is from a different part of the pasuk that's not quoted. Okay, but that's not the case here. Here, the case is it's from those words, but just for the context, right? The pasuk says, "Hu levado yaseh lachem." Right? Kol melacha lo yaseh b'hem. Beforehand, the pasuk says, "Any melacha may not be done." Ach asher yachel lachol nefesh. However, that which is required for eating, asher yachel lachol nefesh, hu levado yaseh lachem. So it's that hu levado yaseh lachem that we're focusing on now. So Chachamim learn it from the fact that it says hu levado yaseh lachem, referring to ochel nefesh, means hu v'lo machshirav. Those melachot that are required for the preparation of food directly, those can be performed, but those which are preliminary to that, the machshirim, may not be performed. Right? Hu v'lo machshirav. Rabbi Yehuda makla lachem. Rabbi Yehuda says, wait a minute. The pasuk says lachem, right? It's not just, it says hu levado yaseh lachem. So when it comes to, so you're right, says Rabbi Yehuda, I agree that hu levado is a limitation, but lachem is coming to include, it's coming to expand. What is it coming to expand? It's coming to say lachem, for whatever need you have, and that would include machshirim. So Tanakama says, okay, Tanakama active lachem. According to the Tanakama, the pasuk also says lachem. They don't only have half the pasuk. So therefore, how do they learn it? How does he learn it? So it says, Amar lachu, the Tanakama would answer you as follows: Hahu lachem v'lo lanochlim. That lachem is going to teach you lachem v'lo lanochlim. That you can perform ochel nefesh for your purposes, for the sake of somebody who is obligated in Yom Tov, but not for non-Jews who are not obligated in Yom Tov. V'idach nami haktiv hu. Okay, so I understand what Tanakama will do with the lachem, but Rabbi Yehuda, who focused on lachem, so for him the pasuk also says hu levado, right, which is also a limitation. So malach haktiv hu v'ktiv lachem. So Rabbi Yehuda says, yes, you're right. The pasuk there's an inherent tension here. It says on the one hand, hu levado yaseh, and it says lachem. So it's coming to expand and it's coming to limit. So how does both those work together? Says Rabbi Yehuda v'lo kasha, kan b'machshirin she'efshar לעשותם מערב יום טוב, כאן מachshirim שאי אפשר לעשותם מערב יום טוב. We make the distinction between those machshirei ochel nefesh that could be performed before Yom Tov and those that could not be performed before Yom Tov. If you could have done it before Yom Tov, So Rabbi Yehuda agrees that you may not do it on Yom Tov itself. But if you couldn't do it before Yom Tov, Rabbi Yehuda says the pasuk is coming to teach me that Machshirah HaNefesh may be performed on Yom Tov. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, okay. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Shiput sheniltzaf asur letokno b'Yom Tov. Okay, so until now, so we gave examples, right? We gave 3 examples of Machshirah HaNefesh. One of them was Shipud sheniltzam. Shiput sheniltzam, as opposed to now we're talking about a Shiput sheniltzaf. What is the difference between Shiput sheniltzam and Shiput sheniltzaf? So again, we're talking about a piece of wood or maybe a piece of metal that you are using, probably a piece of wood in this case, to put the meat on, right, and to grill the meat in that way, like a skewer. So earlier we said if you have a shiput sheniltzam, that means, I think Rashi explained to us, right? If you look a little bit further up in Rashi, it says b'yom tov pointil belaz shenishbal rosho. That is where the tip had fallen off or had broken off. So now you have the skewer, but you don't have the sharp edge, so you can't actually push it through the meat. So there, that's not the cooking itself. That's fixing the shiput, fixing the skewer. This is the stage that's preliminary to the cooking. That is the machshirei nefesh. So we said, Rabbi Yehuda said you're allowed to fix it, and Chachamim said you're not allowed to fix it. Oh, that was where it had broken completely. Now we're talking about a shiput sheniltzam. Sorry, that was a shiput sheniltzam. Now we're talking about a shiput sheniltzaf. So here, says Rashi, shiput sheniltzaf nim'ach shedalsu alav ne'ekam aval lo nishbar. Okay, so it kind of got crushed, it kind of got misshapen. Somebody stepped on it or something, and it's become it's lost its shape, right? But it has not broken. It's twisted or whatever, but it's not broken. So here says the Gemara, Samar Aviram Shmuel, shiput sheniltzaf asur letokno b'Yom Tov. So here we say that according to everybody, you are not allowed to fix that on Yom Tov. So why not? Again, that would also be machshirah nefesh. So says Rashi, asur letokno b'Yom Tov, shalei yachol ishtamesh bo k'mo shehu v'tilcha delo tzorechu. So there's not, so it's a little bit ironic here. We're saying, certainly according to Rabbi, that if the skewer had broken completely, he says you could go and fix it. But if it's not broken completely, if it's just sort of twisted, so you can't go and fix it. Why? If we said you could still use it. Meaning if you're going to go now and fix it, it's an unnecessary tircha, it's an unnecessary exertion. Okay, it's not the best, it's not straight, not exactly the way you wanted it, but you could still use it and get away with it, and therefore you can't fix it. So says the Gemara Pshita, meaning that's obvious. Why do you have to tell me that? Meaning, why do you have to tell you this whole thing? That even if you could do it just with your bare hands, you don't need a tool or anything. Nonetheless, it's still going to be forbidden, right? It says Rashi, you don't need to get a hammer or whatever to go and fix it. You can just fix it with your hands. Okay, you still can't do it. Next case. Once again, it says shipud shetzalu bo basal asur letaltelo b'Yom Tov. Okay, so this is an idea not necessarily true with machshirah nefesh, but since we're talking about shipudim, we're going to continue talking about shipudim, and this is a din that's related to muktzah. So it says if you have the shipud shetzalu bo basal, you've already used the skewer, right, to cook meat on it. So asur letaltelo b'Yom Tov, you cannot move it now on Yom Tov. It is now muktzah. Says Rashi, asur letaltelo. So first of all, shiput shetzalo bo basar b'Yom Tov, meaning you used it on Yom Tov to cook the meat. Asur letaltelo miyad la'achar shenitzla atzli. After you've roasted the meat, you cannot now go and move it. Lefi shenim as, because it becomes disgusting. Muktzeh. Therefore, it becomes muktzeh. Kfar nasa tzorech Yom Tov. You've already used it for Yom Tov purposes. What, you've got no other purposes for it now. Now that it's all got bits of meat and fat and all things that have melted into it, right? And therefore, there's no use for it. Okay. ואמר רבי יהודה משמעו שיפוט שסלו בו בשר עשו אותו לא ביום טוב. רב עדה בר אבא אמר רב מלכיו שומתו מניחו בקרן זווית. Okay, this is what we call tiltul min hatzad. Right, Rav Malchia says you can't really use it, but you can move it. You can sort of move it away. You can right, move it indirectly into the corner. Right, Rashi says, yeah, shomto menicho b'keren zavid. Shomto milefanav. You just get it away from you. Maher, quickly, b'glila v'tiltu min hatzad. You drag it or you kick it or you move it in the indirectly. Ad shavil milefanav lekeren zavid. So it's no longer in front of you. It's just right in the corner somewhere. Avalot tiltu gamur, but you're not actually picking it up and moving it. That is where it still has a kazait of meat on it, so therefore it's not completely muktzah. But if it doesn't have a kazait of meat, so then you can't move it even tiltul min hatzad, even indirectly. Amar Rav Chia bar Ashi, Amar Rav Huna, v'hu sheyesh alav kazait basar. Right, that's what we just said. Ravina Amar af al pi she'ein alav basar. So Ravina says no. He says even if it does not have kazait or it doesn't have meat on it, meaning this is a completely different opinion. He says you can go and you can move it, not just. And the implication here is not just tiltul min hatzad, but you can move it completely. Rashi says shari tiltul tiltul gamur. You can move it completely if it still has a little bit of meat on it. Sorry, even if it doesn't have, meaning. We said our original point was that this shiput is going to be muktzah. Here Ravina is saying no, the shiput actually is not muktzah at all. Why? That's what Rashi said. B'tiltul gamur esalko shelo yizoku bo anshe beito. You can move it away in order that people won't get hurt by it. And he says this is similar to meaning about kotz b'reshut harabim. You have a sort of thorn right in the reshut harabim. So this is okay. This is we see in the Gemara in Shabbat. Rashi says. תמה קירה שסיכוב. תמותר לו הליכה פחות מ-400 עד שמסלקן על הצידי רשות הרבים כדי שלא תזיק. You're allowed to move it less than 4 amot at a time in order to remove it from the reshut harabim so it won't cause damage. Okay, why less than 4 amot? Because that carrying 4 amot in reshut harabim is going to be an isur d'oraita. Carrying less than 4 amot each time and then stopping and then starting again, that's going to be an isur d'Rabbanan. So here, Rabbanan said that moving this kotz, the sharp object that is in the reshut harabim, they said certainly for an isur d'Rabbanan you're allowed to move it. Okay, we're not dealing with a case of something which is pikuach nefesh, because then you would say even isur d'oraita, but isur d'Rabbanan in order to remove the sakana. So that you're allowed to do. So this is very interesting. This is one of the Gemara, this idea of kotz b'reshut harabim. We've spoken about this in the past. But a kotz b'reshut harabim, there is also another sugya of a gachelet shamatechet, where the Gemara talks about if you have a burning hot piece of metal, that you're allowed to move it also. You're allowed to move it away from the reshut harabim. In both these cases, Rav Shaul Yisraeli, who was the Rosh Yeshiva of Merkaz Harav, and he was on the Chief Rabbinate Council, and was very, very, very one of the leading and very influential rabbis in the early years of the state, and some of the not so early years of the state as well. He built on these two Gemarot, other sources also, but basically he says from here you have a din of what essentially we call public welfare. You see that there are certain things which for an individual would not necessarily be allowed, but when it comes to the masses, it comes to the reshut harabim, you're allowed to. It's just like you're allowed to move a kotz in reshut harabim. Why? Because there are many, many people that are going to come there. Or a gachelet shamatechet, meaning it's not. We understand that it's not a case of pikuach nefesh for an individual, but once the public is involved, so then it does end up becoming a case of pikuach nefesh, and there are all sorts of when we're dealing with public infrastructures and things like that. So there are maybe other rules that govern, and we have to start looking at statistics and likely scenarios and all sorts of things, which would not be permitted for an individual, but may be permitted on a mass scale. And it's all based on these principles, which we see in the Gemara. Okay, now the Gemara says something very interesting. So we've just quoted the last din in the name of Rav Malchio, which is an unusual name, but there were two Amoraim who had very unusual names but very similar names. One was called Rav Malchiyo, and one was called Rav Malchiya. And as you can imagine, people used to get confused between Rav Malchiyo and Rav Malchiya. So again, this is in the times of the Gemara, and especially we had before everything was written down in Sustra Shabal Peh, and we had different Braitot and different Mishnayot, etc. And so you had to memorize them. So it's not so easy to remember what did Rav Malchiyo say and what did Rav Malchiya say. So now the Gemara gives us a siman, gives us a way to remember. Of course, it's going to give us two different simanim and two different ways of remembering, and there's going to be enough kamina between them. So we'll see. So we're not sure which is correct, but there's going to be a difference. So here says the Gemara, we are 1, 2, 3, 4 lines before the Mishnah. Amar Rav Chinana b'reid Rav Ika. Shepud, shfachot, v'gumot, Rav Malchiyo. Blorit, efer makle, ugvina, Rav Malchiya. Okay, so we have 3 dinim. It gives you a siman, gives you a way to remember. He says the din relating to the shepud, to shfachot, and gumot, all of those were dinim that were said by Rav Malchiyo. On the other hand, these dinim are to blorit, efer mekle, and gvina. These are dinim that were said by Rav Malchiya. Okay, so what are these cases? So the first one is shipud. So that's what we've already seen. We've already discussed it. And before that, let's just see Rashi. Rashi towards the end of the narrow lines, he says shipud, shfachot, v'gumot Rav Malchiyo. Eilu shalosh halachot, Rav Malchiyo amran, v'lo Rav Malchiya. Okay, so these were 3 halachot that were taught by Rav Malchiyo and not taught by Rav Malchiya. Mipnei sheshmotein domin ze lazeh, since they have very similar names. Okay, v'yesh machlifin shmoa shel zeh b'shel zeh, because the names are so similar, people get confused and people say, "Oh, Rav Malchiya said this thing, but it's actually Rav Malchiyo." So therefore, anuvim siman asadei shmot. So you have a siman in order to remember. So what's your siman? Your siman is shiput shfachot v'gumiot Rav Malchiyo. Okay, so shipur adam ran. That's exactly the thing that we said about whether you can move it or not move it as a muktzah. And he said you can move it tiltul min hatzad to get away from it. The second thing is shvachot, which is maidservants. What's that about? So Rashi says, Mishnai b'ktubot. We have a Mishnah in Mesach Ktubot. Rabbi Eliezer omer, afilu ichnisa lo mea shvachot kofel asot b'tzem. So there, the Mishnah talks about the different melachot. When you sign a ktubah, certain melachot and certain jobs that a woman is obligated to perform in the household. Again, the way these things work practically nowadays is a little bit different between the times of the Mishnah, but anyways, the principles remain the same. So it says, if a woman, one of them is sewing, weaving, etc., if she brings shvachot with her, she brings maidservants along with her, does she still have to perform those melachot or not? So Rabbi Eliezer Omer afilu ichnisa lo mea shvachot kofel asot b'tzemer. He says yes, even if she has shvachot, doesn't matter. She still has to do these melachot. Why? Shapatala mevia lidei zima. Because being stopping and being bored and having nothing to do leads to all sorts of bad things, right? And therefore, Amar Rav Malchiyo alachak Rabbi Eliezer. So Rav Malchiyo said that the halakha follows Rabbi Eliezer in this instance. So that was Rav Malchiyo and Rav Malchiyan. The third one is gumot. So gumot means it can mean like a ditch in the ground. Here it does not mean that. It means pores in the skin. The sugya is we're dealing with the simanei bagrut, meaning how do you know when somebody has reached physical maturity? The reach of the siman of adulthood is 2 hairs, right? So it says shmatai. Rashi says gumot shmatahi. This is a brayta. V'lo ne'emra ala mishnah. It was not said in the Mishnah. Ulenyan shtei sa'alot. We'll see later on why that's important. Ulenyan shtei sa'alot. Im nimtzu la gumot shemakom sayal afal pi she'en sham sayal gdolai. Meaning, if there is a pore and the hair has not grown yet, but there's a pore that which is an indication there will be hair, is that already a sign of bagrut or not? So here there is an opinion that says the ein guma elam ken haya basayal ela shenashlo. If we see the pore, we assume that there was a hair there and it fell out. Okay, so that is also the opinion of Rav Malchi. So those are the 3 cases: shiput, shvachot, and gumot. Then we said blorit, efer makle v'gvina Rav Malchiya. There were 3 dinim that were said right? And there was so somebody remembers this case. Remember there was this case. It was Rav Malchi Yor, Rav Malchia. It's a unique name. You'll remember that it was one of them, but you have to remember which. So Rav Malchia says these three cases. What are these three cases that he says? The first one is right blorit. So blorit, I'm not even sure how you translate that in English, but that is a piece of it's an area of the hair, an area of hair that is left in the middle of the head, this was the typical haircut of avodah zarah, that they would leave this hair in a specific way. So the question is, if you're cutting hair for a non-Jew, and are you allowed to cut around the blorit? You have to leave a certain area around the blorit so that you're not part of becoming an accessory to avodah zarah. So it says Rashi blorit b'mesechta avodah zarah v'obraita nemra had Rav Malchia leperush le'borait. Okay, so this is the Masechet Avodah Zarah. This is on the Braita, and Rav Malchia explained the Braita as follows: the Tan Rabbanan kuti amistaper miYisrael. So a Jew is giving a haircut to a non-Jew. Kevan shegiel blorito shomet et yado. When he gets near the blorit, so he has to stop. He has to remove his hand. Okay. Because there's no Jew, and he's leaving this area of his hair as part of it. That's part of his avodah zarah. Okay, so how what's the geder? How far away do you have to stop cutting? Amar Rav Malchia shalosh etzbot lekol ruach v'ruach lechol stivotei. He says 3 fingers, the amount of 3 fingers in every direction. Lo yiga, don't touch it. Im yigaleach v'yalech al blorit nimtza maniach lo bloritov tikna lo l'shem avodah zarah. If you start cutting over there, so you're going to come to the blorit, you're going to be involved in the avodah zarah. So that's what he said. Okay, the second one is that's regarding blorit. The second one is efer makleh, which is wooden ashes. What are we dealing with here? So you might remember this. We learned it a long time ago. Efer makleh shmatai b'mesechet makot. That's we saw in Mesechet Makot. Amar Rav Malchia lo yiten adam efer makleh al gabei makato mipnei shenireh ki ktovet karka. You should not place ashes on a wound that looks like you're making a permanent imprint, like a permanent tattoo. So that he says you should not do. And the final one is relating to gvina, relating to cheese. So yeah, Rashi says perusha dematnitin itma Masechet Avodah Zarah. We have a Mishnah in Masechet Avodah Zarah that talks about making cheese, right? Non-Jews who make cheese, and the Mishnah there is a little bit cryptic. It does not give us all the reasons as to why these cheeses would be forbidden. So he says, there's discussion in the Gemara as to why the cheese is forbidden. Okay, one understanding is that it's got to do with using the stomach, which you use in order to produce the cheese, and it's from a non-kosher or from a nevela. But here Rav Malchia says the reason is because they would smear pig fat onto the cheese. Okay, so that's how we know the difference between what Rav Malchia said and what Rav Malchio said. That's one siman. That's one way to remember it, distinguishing just between these 3 halachot and these 3 halachot. Now says the Gemara, Rav Papa Amar matnitin umatnita Rav Malchia shmatata Rav Malchio. Okay, so Rav Papa has a different understanding, has a different siman. He says anything that was taught in matnitin or matnita, anything that was taught in a Mishnah or a Braita, okay, and then Rav Malchia, who's an Amora, was just saying something relating to the din of the Tanaim, that is Rav Malchia. So the cases that we saw, of Shvachot and of Blurit and of Gvina, those were said by Rav Malchia. But Shmatata, anything which is a Shmuah, which was said by the Amoraim, that would be Rav Malchio. Okay, so he says Simanech matnitin malkita. So the way to remember this is we say matnitin, meaning anything that was said by the Tanaim, that is malkita. Malkita means the queen, but that's how Rav Malchia sounds more like sounds like the feminine. So that's like the queen is saying the matnitin, right? In other words, so that's what Rashi says. Matnitin of Malchia. He says a simana. the Itnach Rav Malkia Palig of Papa regarding the Siman. In order to remember, that's what the Torah of Papa disagrees. Okay, so what's the difference between the two Simanim? Between right, Rav Chinan Abreder Rav Ika and Rav Papa. So say my Benayu Shvachot. That is the case that's going to be different between them. And you see Rashi says Shvachot the matnitin he umashved Rav Malkiyo. Right, so we said before Shvachot that would be related to right, in the first siman, Shvachot was part of the dinim that was told by Rav Malkiyo. So now we're saying, but that was relating to the Mishnah. So it says, Lavdi Dei, the Koma Nidra Manita, the Itpo Rav Malkiya Ma Perushan. Papa says, no, anytime we're dealing with the Mishnah, it was Rav Malkiya who said the Perush, and therefore Roshmata Damat Rav Malkiyo, when she put Vegumot, Tide Ninu. Okay, so regarding that case, that's what we're not sure. Regarding the case of Shvachot, if we assume the first siman is correct, that was said by Rav Malchiyo. If we assume the second siman is correct, that was said by Rav Malchiya. Okay, we'll stop there for today, and we'll pick it up from the Mishnah tomorrow at the end of the daf. Good day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. Be
See you
well.
tomorrow,
By the
Beverly.
way, Rav, did you this Shiur resumed last week, correct? The Shiur
Yes.
resumed last week. Okay, very good. I can find the recordings on YouTube. I
Yes,
assume?
yes, this should be on YouTube.
Very good. Thank you. Okay.